3,000 feet down in the South China Sea, something sits in the darkness that shouldn't have been forgotten. June 2024. The Lost 52 Project's autonomous underwater vehicle captured images that stopped everyone cold. The USS Harder, the submarine that terrorized Japanese destroyers for 2 years, rests exactly where it died 80 years ago, with all 79 crew members still sealed inside. When maritime archaeologists first saw the wreck footage, they couldn't believe the condition. The conning tower stands like a monument. The radar mast, that distinctive SJ setup offset to starboard, exactly where the 1944 blueprint said it would be. Even the deck gun remains in position. But there's something else down there that changes everything we thought we knew about submarine warfare. Because when you study the damage patterns on that hull, when you see exactly where those Japanese depth charges tore through the boat, you realize something unsettling. The crew had time, not much, but enough. Enough to make decisions. Enough to fight back. Which makes you wonder what those final moments were like inside a submarine called Harder, commanded by the most aggressive captain in U.S. Navy history. A man who didn't run from destroyers, he hunted them. August 24, 1944. The USS Harder was operating as part of a wolf pack near Dasol Bay in the Philippines. Commander Samuel Dealey had already completed 5 war patrols, sinking more enemy ships than most submarine captains dreamed of. He'd earned the Medal of Honor for his tactics. His crew painted "Hit 'em Harder" on the conning tower. It wasn't swagger, it was a warning. But on that August morning, something went wrong. The Harder made contact with a small Japanese convoy, 2 submarine chasers and minimal escort. For Dealey this was routine. He'd attacked larger formations and survived. At 10:30 hours, he fired 3 torpedoes at close range. 2 missed, 1 struck the submarine chaser's CD-22, but the damage wasn't fatal. In any normal engagement, this would trigger immediate evasive action. Dive deep, clear the area, reposition. Instead, Dealey ordered the Harder to maintain position for a follow-up shot. It was the kind of aggressive decision that had made him legendary. It was also the decision that would kill everyone aboard. To understand why the USS Harder's discovery in 2024 matters, you need to understand what made this submarine different from every other boat in the Pacific Fleet. The Harder wasn't special because of her equipment or design. She was a standard Gato-class submarine, identical to dozens of others. What made her legendary was her commander and the tactics he pioneered. Commander Samuel Dealey graduated from the Naval Academy in 1930. By 1943, he'd been given command of the USS Harder. Submarine doctrine in 1943 was clear: avoid destroyers at all costs. These fast, heavily armed escort ships were specifically built to hunt and kill submarines. They carried depth charges, sonar equipment, and the speed to run down any submarine trying to escape. Standard procedure was simple: if you see a destroyer, dive deep and run silent until it passes. Dealey threw that doctrine overboard. Instead of avoiding destroyers, he developed what became known as the down-the-throat attack. While other submarines fled, Dealey would turn directly toward approaching destroyers and fire torpedoes head-on. It was tactically brilliant and psychologically devastating. Japanese destroyer captains, trained to hunt submarines, suddenly found themselves being hunted. The results spoke for themselves. During the Harder's second war patrol in August 1943, Dealey sank 5 merchant ships totaling over 25,000 tons. But it was what happened during the attacks that set the Harder apart. While other submarines took single shots and disappeared, Dealey's crew would surface during daytime attacks, using their deck gun to finish off damaged vessels. By early 1944, Japanese naval intelligence had identified the Harder as a priority target. Destroyer squadrons received specific orders to hunt down the submarine with the aggressive commander. But instead of making Dealey more cautious, the attention seemed to fuel his tactics. During the 4th patrol, in March 1944, the Harder achieved something unprecedented. They sank the destroyer Ikazuchi, using a point-blank down-the-throat shot, then surfaced to rescue a downed American pilot while Japanese aircraft circled overhead. The rescue operation revealed something crucial about the Harder's crew. While under attack, they maintained the discipline and coordination necessary for complex surface operations. These weren't cowboys. They were a precision instrument of naval warfare. But there's something else buried in those patrol reports that naval historians still debate. The Harder's success rate wasn't just about tactics, it was about persistence. Dealey's crew conducted longer patrols, took more risks, and engaged more targets than any comparable submarine. By the spring of 1944, as the Harder prepared for its fifth patrol, Dealey had already completed more consecutive combat missions than submarine doctrine recommended. And yet, when the call came for the most dangerous mission yet, disrupting Japanese naval operations before the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Dealey and his crew volunteered immediately. May 1944. The Pacific War was reaching its climax, and American intelligence had identified a critical vulnerability in Japanese naval strategy. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet was concentrating at Tawi-Tawi in the Philippines, preparing for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But Ozawa's fleet was protected by destroyer escorts, the very ships designed to hunt submarines. Most submarine commanders would have approached this mission with extreme caution. Not Dealey. The Harder's fifth patrol began on May 26, 1944, with orders that seemed almost suicidal. Penetrate deep into Japanese-controlled waters and attack destroyer formations directly. What happened next became the most successful submarine patrol in Pacific War history. June 6, 1944. While Allied forces were landing at Normandy, the Harder encountered its first target, the destroyer Minazuki. Instead of the standard approach, Dealey ordered a surface attack in broad daylight. The Minazuki, confident in its ability to outrun and outgun any submarine, turned directly toward the Harder. It was exactly what Dealey wanted. At 1,000 yards, the Harder fired 3 torpedoes in a perfect spread. The Minazuki exploded and sank in under 4 minutes. But Dealey wasn't finished. Rather than diving and fleeing the area, he ordered the Harder to remain on station, hunting for more targets. Japanese naval doctrine called for destroyer formations to respond immediately to submarine attacks with coordinated depth charge patterns. Dealey was counting on it. June 8. The destroyer Hayanami arrived to investigate Minazuki's last known position. Naval records show Hayanami's sonar operators detected the Harder at maximum range and immediately began an attack approach. Once again, Dealey turned directly into the threat. The down-the-throat attack succeeded. Hayanami broke apart with all hands. June 9. The destroyer Tanakaze, accompanied by 2 escort vessels, swept the area where 2 destroyers had already disappeared. By this point, Japanese naval intelligence knew they were dealing with a single submarine operating with unprecedented aggression. The Tanakaze's captain, following standard anti-submarine doctrine, began a systematic depth charge pattern to force the submarine to the surface. What happened next defied every principle of submarine warfare. Instead of seeking deeper water, Dealey brought the Harder to periscope depth and waited. When the Tanakaze closed to point-blank range, confident the submarine was trapped, Dealey fired 4 torpedoes simultaneously. The Tanakaze's explosion was visible from 20 miles away. In 4 days, the Harder had sunk 3 destroyers, a feat unmatched by any submarine in any navy, but the strategic impact went beyond ship counts. Admiral Ozawa, deprived of critical destroyer escorts, was forced to abandon his base at Tawi-Tawi earlier than planned. This premature departure disrupted Japanese timing for the Philippine Sea engagement and contributed directly to their devastating defeat. Naval historians still debate how one submarine crew sustained this level of combat effectiveness. The official reports described textbook execution of advanced torpedo tactics, but submarine veterans who've studied the patrol logs noticed something else: signs of extreme fatigue masked by adrenaline and combat focus. Consider the timeline. The Harder had been at sea for over 2 weeks when the destroyer engagements began. Submarine crews during extended patrols typically showed decreased reaction times and impaired judgment after 14 days. Yet Dealey's crew was executing complex attack sequences with mathematical precision. When the Harder returned from its 5th patrol on July 3, 1944, something had changed. Crew rotation schedules show several requests for transfer that were denied due to operational requirements. Medical reports indicate increased sickbay visits for stress-related symptoms. But instead of rotating the crew, Submarine Command made a different decision. The Harder was too valuable, too effective to sideline. On August 5, 1944, just 1 month after returning from the most successful submarine patrol in naval history, Dealey and his crew departed on their 6th mission. It would be their last. August 1944. The Philippines were burning. American forces were preparing for the largest amphibious assault since D-Day, and Japanese defenders were desperately trying to reinforce their positions. Into this chaos, Submarine Command sent the Harder on one final mission: operate in a coordinated wolf pack with USS Harter and USS Harter to interdict Japanese supply lines around Luzon. But this patrol was different from the beginning. For the first time, the Harder wasn't hunting alone. Wolfpack tactics required precise coordination between multiple submarines, split-second timing, shared target information, coordinated attack sequences. It demanded the kind of seamless teamwork that only comes from crews operating at peak efficiency. The problem was that Dealey's crew had been operating beyond peak efficiency for months. 6 consecutive combat patrols, no rotation, no extended shore leave. By August 1944, the Harter's crew had been in continuous combat operations longer than submarine doctrine recommended. The first 2 weeks of the patrol proceeded normally. Working with Harter and Harter, the Harter sank 2 Japanese frigates, Matsuwa and Hiburi. The attacks demonstrated the same precision and aggression that had made the 5th Patrol legendary. But veterans who served on other submarines during the same period noticed something in the radio communications. The Harter's transmissions, while tactically sound, carried an edge that suggested extreme operational tempo. August 24, 1944. The Wolfpack received intelligence about a small Japanese convoy moving along the coast near Dasol Bay, Luzon. The convoy consisted of 2 submarine chasers, CD-22 and patrol boat P-102, along with minimal escort. By Wolfpack standards, it was a routine target. Exactly the kind of engagement that had become second nature to Dealey's crew. But routine is where fatigue becomes deadly. Standard Wolfpack protocol called for coordinated attacks from multiple angles, with each submarine taking assigned targets to avoid mutual interference. The plan was textbook. Harter and Harter would engage the escorts while Harter targeted the primary vessels. At 10:30 hours, the attack commenced exactly as planned. Harter fired 3 torpedoes at close range. 2 missed. 1 struck CD-22, but the damage wasn't fatal. In any normal engagement, this would have triggered immediate evasive action: dive deep, clear the area, reposition for another attack. Instead, Dealey ordered the Harter to maintain position for a follow-up shot. It was a decision that veteran submariners still debate. Some argue it demonstrated Dealey's signature aggressiveness, the same tactical audacity that had made the Harter legendary. Others suggest it reflected impaired judgment from extended combat operations. What's certain is that it gave the Japanese submarine chasers exactly what they needed: a stationary target. CD-22, though damaged, was still capable of launching depth charges. At 10:45 hours, Japanese records show a pattern of 6 440-pound charges dropped in a precise grid around the Harter's last known position. Most submarine depth charge attacks were hasty affairs, rapid drops while moving at high speed to avoid torpedo counterattacks. This was different. This was methodical. The first charges exploded simultaneously at 150 feet, exactly the depth the submarine would use for a follow-up attack. The Harter, caught in the center of the pattern, took multiple direct hits. But here's where the story becomes puzzling. Instead of catastrophic flooding in the forward compartments, the typical cause of submarine loss, the fatal damage occurred aft of the conning tower. Why does that matter? Because aft of the conning tower is where the submarine's command and control systems were located. The plotting table, radio equipment, sonar station, everything Dealey would need to coordinate an emergency surfacing or damage control response. The location of the fatal damage suggests that whatever happened in those final moments, the crew lost their ability to fight back almost immediately. Harter and Harter, monitoring radio frequencies, heard the Harter's last transmission at 10:47 hours. It was a standard damage report: flooded compartments, loss of electrical power, attempting emergency surface. Then, silence. What followed was a mystery that wouldn't be solved for 80 years. June 2024. Dr. Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 project team were reviewing sonar data from their latest Philippines expedition when something appeared on the screens that changed everything. At coordinates 15°43 in 119°58 E, more than 3,000 feet below the South China Sea, Their autonomous underwater vehicles had detected a large metallic object sitting perfectly upright on the seafloor. Initial sonar returns suggested a submarine, but the condition was unprecedented. Most World War II submarine wrecks are found on their sides or severely damaged from the forces of sinking and seafloor impact. This vessel appeared to have settled gently, as if it had descended under some form of control. When the first high-resolution images arrived via ROV cameras, the identification was immediate. The distinctive Mod 3 conning tower fairwater, the unique SJ radar mast offset to starboard, the 76 mm deck gun still in position. Every detail matched the technical specifications for USS Harder as configured during its 1944 overhaul at Mare Island. But it was what the cameras revealed about the wreck's condition that stunned maritime archaeologists. The Harder sits completely upright on its keel, as if it had been deliberately placed there. The conning tower, where Dealey and his officers would have coordinated their final battle, remains intact. The periscopes are still extended. Most remarkably, some hatches appear to be open, suggesting crew members attempted emergency escape procedures. Advanced photogrammetry techniques allowed researchers to create detailed, three-dimensional models without disturbing the wreck site. What they found contradicts standard assumptions about submarine warfare casualties. The massive hole in the port side hull aft of the conning tower shows clear evidence of depth charge damage, but the blast pattern suggests the charges detonated while the submarine was already at significant depth, not during a surface or shallow water engagement. This raises questions about the Harder's final moments. If the submarine was deep enough to take depth charge damage in that specific location, why was it holding position instead of executing evasive maneuvers? The damage pattern is consistent with a submarine that was somehow unable to respond to the attack, whether due to mechanical failure, crew incapacitation, or tactical misjudgment. Even more puzzling is the wreck's final position. Computer models show that a submarine suffering catastrophic hull breach at depth should tumble as it sinks, coming to rest at random angles determined by current and seafloor topography. The Harder's upright position suggests either incredible luck or that someone was still controlling the boat's descent even as it flooded. Dr. Samuel J. Cox, director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, described the discovery as providing closure and answers. But for families of the 79 sailors entombed inside, the wreck raises more questions than it answers, because as a designated war grave under the Sunken Military Craft Act, no investigation of the interior compartments has been attempted. This means everything that happened inside the Harder during its final minutes remains exactly as it was on August 24, 1944. The radio logs that would explain that last transmission. The plotting charts that would show the crew's understanding of their tactical situation. The personal effects and duty stations that would reveal who was where when the depth charges struck. Most haunting of all, the sealed compartments almost certainly contain the remains of sailors who were still fighting to save their boat when the lights went out forever. The Harder's motto was "Hit 'em harder." But the wreck forces us to confront what happened when the hardest-hitting crew in submarine history finally met their match. Contemporary submarine veterans who've studied the photogrammetry data notice details that don't appear in official reports. The ammunition lockers remain sealed, suggesting the crew didn't have time for a prolonged surface battle. The radar mast configuration indicates the Harder was set up for nighttime operations, yet the attack occurred in broad daylight. Most significantly, some hatches appear open, suggesting someone attempted emergency surface procedures, standard protocol when flooding threatens the entire boat. But emergency surfacing requires precise coordination between multiple crew members across different compartments. The depth charge damage to the command and control area would have made such coordination nearly impossible. Which brings us back to the central mystery. How did a submarine crew cut off from their command center and taking on massive flooding manage to control their boat's descent to the seafloor? The answer lies somewhere inside those dark compartments, along with 79 American sailors who've been waiting 80 years to tell their story. Today, the U.S. Harder rests in eternal patrol beneath the South China Sea, its hull serving as both monument and mausoleum to submarine warfare's highest achievements and ultimate costs. The wreck site, protected by international maritime law and designated as a war grave, represents something unprecedented in naval archaeology. A perfectly preserved snapshot of submarine combat at the moment of ultimate consequence. For the families of the 79 sailors entombed inside, the discovery provides a location for remembrance, but not the closure that many hoped for. Joan Dealey, niece of Commander Samuel Dealey, described the identification as bittersweet. We know where they are, but we'll never know what they were thinking in those final moments. That uncertainty reflects a broader truth about submarine warfare that the Harter's wreck makes impossible to ignore. Unlike surface naval battles where survivors could describe the action and historians could reconstruct events from multiple perspectives, submarine losses often took their secrets to the bottom. The Harter's crew fought their final battle in isolation, 3,000 feet from the surface, with no witnesses except the enemy who killed them. But the wreck also reveals something remarkable about the nature of service under extreme conditions. The Harter's crew, operating at the edge of human endurance for months, maintained their tactical effectiveness until the very end. They sank 2 more Japanese vessels during their final patrol, bringing their total to 22 ships destroyed across 6 combat missions. No other submarine in any navy matched that record of sustained combat success. Modern submarine veterans studying the wreck site recognize something that official histories often overlook: the psychological cost of that success. Extended combat operations, especially in submarine warfare's isolated environment, create stress patterns that 1940s naval medicine was only beginning to understand. The Harter's crew operated beyond normal human limits because their tactical advantage, Dealey's aggressive down-the-throat attacks, required split-second timing and absolute crew coordination. The question that haunts every submarine expert who studied the wreck footage is whether that psychological edge ultimately contributed to their loss. Did months of hyper-aggressive tactics create decision-making patterns that became counterproductive when applied to routine convoy attacks? Was the crew's legendary fearlessness actually a form of combat fatigue that made normal evasive action psychologically impossible? We'll never know because the evidence died with the crew. The radio logs, plotting charts, and duty station records that would answer these questions remain sealed inside compartments that will never be opened. As a war grave, the Harter is protected from archaeological investigation, meaning the submarine that revolutionized naval tactics will keep its final secrets forever. Yet perhaps that's fitting for a boat whose motto was "Hit 'em harder." The crew's legacy isn't in the mysteries they took to the bottom, but in the tactical innovations that shaped submarine warfare for generations. Modern attack submarines still use variations of Dealey's down-the-throat approach. The wolf-pack coordination techniques developed during the Harter's final patrol became standard doctrine for submarine operations worldwide. Most importantly, the Harter's story illustrates the human cost of military innovation. Every tactical advance, every strategic breakthrough, every weapon system that changes the balance of war, all of it depends on crews willing to push beyond normal human limits. The 79 sailors entombed in the Harter weren't just casualties of war. They were the price of developing warfare techniques that saved countless other lives. As long as those compartments remain sealed, we'll never know if crew fatigue played a role in that final fatal attack sequence. But perhaps that uncertainty is itself a form of memorial, a reminder that some sacrifices can't be fully understood, only honored. 3,000 feet below the South China Sea, 79 American sailors continue their eternal patrol in the submarine that changed naval warfare forever. They took their secrets with them, but their legacy lives on in every submarine that learned to hit harder because of their sacrifice. What other legendary submarines are still waiting in the deep, carrying stories we'll never hear?